My name's Brandy, and I paid for every flower, every chair, every glass of wine at my sister's wedding. But when I showed up, my own mother told me, don't embarrass us. Then someone handed me a plate I was allergic to, called me just the event help. And I realized they never forgot me, they erased me. So I pulled the thread they built their perfect day on, and everything came undone. I parked 2 rows from the edge of the gravel lot, the kind of spot people leave for vendors, not family. But no one had saved me a place, not on the lot, not inside, not anywhere that mattered. Wisteria Hollow looked like something out of a wedding magazine. White pillars, warm string lights, manicured lawns, and an air thick with money and good breeding. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you needed permission to exhale. I stood there for a minute longer than I should have, hand on the door handle, trying to remember if I still had that old AR handkerchief. My father's embroidered initials, a quiet shield I didn't even know I'd need again. I'd pressed my lavender dress that morning like it meant something. Weeks of planning, ironing, adjusting the sleeves just so. But stepping out of the car, I could already feel it. I wasn't on the welcome board. My name wasn't on the seating chart, and I knew I was already too much. Inside, the chatter was pleasant. Forced. And I walked toward the bridal suite, hoping to hand Tressa a small gift. Just something quiet, personal, a silk wrap for her bouquet. She wouldn't need it, but I wanted her to have it anyway. Before I could knock, Lorna stood at the door. My mother. In her hand, a clipboard. On her face, that familiar blend of tight lips and loose tolerance. That's a bold choice of color, she said, scanning me from head to toe. I held the bouquet wrap a little closer. It's just lavender, Mom. We discussed. She leaned in. Don't wear that in the pictures, okay? It's loud. You don't want to pull focus from your sister, do you? There was a pause between us, brief, heavy, loud in its silence. I nodded. Right. Of course. I turned away before I said something I couldn't pull back. Found the nearest restroom and stood inside for 5 minutes, staring at myself under yellow light. Was it ever about the dress? Or just me? A planner guided me to my seat with a pleasant smile, like I was another vendor. You're at table 14, near the doors, she said. I smiled back, nodded, followed. The table was next to the restrooms, no linens, no floral centerpiece. I sat down and looked around. Guests from the groom's side, people who'd only met Tressa last year, were closer to the head table than I was. A woman in a sleek green gown stopped in front of me, holding her wineglass out. Pinot Grigio, please. Light on the pour? She thought I was staff. I smiled anyway. Sorry, I'm not... Never mind. She didn't hear the end of it. She was already gone. I clenched the water glass in front of me. It rattled lightly on the table. There was a time I thought being invited meant being included. I used to believe presence was enough. But birthdays, holidays, my own graduation, I'd been there. And still, somehow not. My father once told me, don't let them convince you that being quiet means being invisible. I'd held on to that, repeated it like prayer. Now I wondered if I'd just made their job easier. Tried mingling during the cocktail hour. Tried being someone other than the silent sister. Case, Tressa's best friend since high school, smiled with her teeth and said, Hi, Brandy, I love your hair like that. Then turned to someone else before I answered. A man in a pinstriped suit looked at my name tag, back up at me. Oh, I didn't know Tressa had a sister. Yeah, I said, voice calm. Happens. I slipped out to the garden where the music was muffled by double-paned glass and distance, sat on a bench behind the fountain, pulled out the handkerchief from my purse. AR. My initials. My father's gift. I wiped my palms with it, folded it carefully, and whispered just loud enough for no one to hear. Stay small. Stay quiet. Just get through today. The ceremony wrapped up with clapping that felt a bit too polished. I stood off to the side of the reception hall, far enough not to be seen, close enough to hear everything. The string quartet had switched to something more upbeat. People were filing into the main dining area, laughing and complimenting each other as if the whole day had gone off without a hitch. I kept my eyes on the floral arches. I remembered how many hours I spent going back and forth with the supplier. Those Ecuadorian roses weren't just expensive, they were deliberate. Cream for the family rose, dusty pink for the bridal walkway, burgundy accents near the altar to make Tressa's dress pop. Not a single arrangement was wrong, and not a single arrangement was acknowledged as mine. A bridesmaid passed by and whispered to another, "Tressa really has an eye for detail." I didn't even blink. But something inside me shifted, like a breath I'd been holding too long finally turning sour. I took a seat near one of the side tables. As the MC stepped up with his mic and wide grin, people quieted. The thank yous began. He called out Tressa's best friend, the groom's cousin, the caterer, even the high school English teacher who once told Tressa she had an eye for elegance. I waited. My name didn't come. Not even a glance. Nothing. A woman 2 chairs over leaned toward someone and whispered, "Do you know who she came with?" The response, "I think she's with the planner. Or maybe a vendor?" I smiled politely. An older man I hadn't seen in years, Dad's old work buddy, caught my eye. "Brandy, right? I thought you'd moved out west." I shook my head. "No, just kept local." He nodded, then turned back to the slideshow starting behind the stage. I leaned back and told myself, I never left. I just became too invisible to remember. A few minutes later, I found my mother near the dessert table, laughing with someone I vaguely recognized from her bridge group. I waited a moment before stepping closer. "Hi, Mom," I said, soft but steady. She turned, smiled, then said to the guest beside her, "This is Brandy. She's helping out with the event support today. So helpful." I stared at her. She didn't stutter, didn't flinch. "Helping with the event support," she said, as if I were a rental chair. "You mean your daughter?" I replied. She laughed like I was joking. The guest gave me a nod that felt like an exit cue and turned to refill her drink. I didn't say another word. I just walked toward the side hallway, shoes echoing slightly on the floor that nobody seemed to hear. The further I walked, the easier it was to breathe. In that corridor, I stood still for a few minutes. Not because I was lost, because I needed the silence. That was always my role, wasn't it? The quiet one, the extra. Tressa had always been the centerpiece. School plays, college honors, framed degrees on every wall of our mother's hallway. Even her ex-boyfriends stayed friends with the family. Me? I was the helper, the kid with a good heart, not a bright future. Even at Mom's charity gala years ago, I raised most of the silent auction funds. But in the speech, only Tressa was thanked for organizing such a beautiful evening. It made me ask something I hadn't dared until now. What is a legacy if no one links your name to your work? Back at the table, I tried to settle into the evening, maybe a conversation, something neutral, but they kept asking. "So, are you with the venue staff? You must have helped with the flower delivery? You're with who again?" I smiled, nodded, let it all wash over me. At some point, I must have decided it was easier to nod than correct them. I didn't even remember when that started. But the moment that cracked me, really cracked me, was when I entered the restroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked old, but because she looked erased, like a ghost that had stopped trying to haunt anything. I reached into my purse, pulled out the AR handkerchief, and stared at it like it might give me some kind of answer. My father's initials. My father's eyes. I remembered him telling me once, during a moment like this, "You're not made to be wallpaper, Brandy." He was right. But I'd let them paste me to the background so many times, I couldn't tell where I ended, and the wall began. I folded the handkerchief slowly, carefully, and tucked it back where it came from. And that was the moment I realized, this wasn't forgetfulness. It was intention. I didn't walk back into the reception. I walked into the next version of myself. Not the kind you announce with a toast or a tear, the quiet kind. The kind you don't know is happening until you realize you're not waiting anymore. I took a left past the catering hallway. The further I moved from the laughter and champagne, the easier it was to breathe. Somewhere between the kitchen noise and the loading dock, I found a side corridor. Dim lights, stacked chairs, empty platters waiting to be cleared. No one stopped me. No one even looked my way. A planner brushed past, clipboard in hand, and didn't say a word. Not even eye contact. That, I think, was the moment it clicked. I'd become so easy to overlook, they'd stopped pretending I was part of the backdrop. I wasn't even on the wall anymore. There was a prep room tucked behind a partition. I stepped inside. One fluorescent light flickered overhead, a table covered in half-labeled bins, a stack of unused centerpieces, still wrapped. I sat down on an overturned crate and let my shoulders fall. That was the first time all day I let my posture relax. And that's when I heard it. Two voices, talking just outside the open door. "She came?" one said. The voice was familiar in a vague Sunday afternoon book club way. The other responded, "I'm amazed Tressa even invited her after the college stunt." College stunt. It landed like a stone to the chest. "You mean that protest thing? That's just who Brandy's always been, always making things uncomfortable." They moved on. Their heels echoed down the hall like punctuation. But I stayed still. The walkout, sophomore year, the layoffs, the silence from administration, the tenured professor who pulled me aside and said, "You'll tank your GPA if you push this." And I pushed anyway, not because it was loud, but because it was right. But that part never made it into the family story. To them, it was a tantrum. Something I should have outgrown. Something they never asked about, never wanted the truth of. Just another line in the version of me they rewrote without asking. I stood up, heart oddly calm, and reached for a random cabinet door to busy my hands. Inside, between a stack of unused sashes and broken candles, I saw it. Brown leather, worn at the corners, my handwriting on the spine in silver Sharpie. The wedding journal, the one I'd made for Tressa, the one with color-coded tabs, fabric samples, venue reviews, backup vendor numbers, sitting in a bin labeled discard. I pulled it out. Pages bent from use, dog-eared corners, vendor cards still stapled inside. A sticky note slapped across the front. Unusable. Too sentimental. That was the label. Not outdated. Not incorrect. Too sentimental. I turned to the first page. My handwriting stared back. "Let's build something beautiful. Together." I sat down on the floor. Didn't cry. Just held it. And for a second, I was back in the moment I handed it to her. We were in the kitchen. Tressa had just gotten engaged. I'd worked on that journal for weeks, thought she'd cry, maybe even hug me, but she'd said, "Thanks," without opening it. Then reached for her phone to take a call from her fiancé. Now here it was, among broken candles. I stepped out of the room, needed air, found a side door and walked out toward the back lot where delivery vans were parked. I reached into my purse and pulled out the AR handkerchief, folded, worn soft from years of use. "You're not made to be wallpaper," Dad had told me once. It was during a night when I was maybe 10. Tressa had won something again, some school award, and my drawing, one I'd spent a week on, got pushed to the back of the fridge. I'd asked him, "Is it not good enough?" He'd said, "They don't need to hang it up to know it's real. But maybe one day, you'll write something they can't ignore." I looked down at the journal again. It wasn't trash. It was evidence, not of what they saw me as, but of who I actually was. I pressed it to my chest once more, then tucked it under my arm. In that moment, I took inventory, not of pain, but of pattern. Every time I'd been overlooked, every effort claimed by someone else, every silent compromise, it wasn't nobility, it wasn't maturity, it was permission. And I'd been giving it out like candy. I looked back toward the building. My silence had become their foundation, and I was done co-signing my own disappearance. I walked back into the hall the way someone walks into their own funeral. Quiet, stiff, trying not to interrupt anything. The music had picked up. People were looser now, laughing louder, glasses clinking harder. I stayed near the bar, pretending to scan the drink list, but really just watching. There was no place here for standing still. Waiters slipped by with practiced ease. Cousins I hadn't seen in years posed for pictures with people who didn't know their names. And in the middle of it all, Tressa was glowing like a movie poster. Every angle perfect, every corner of the room reflecting her. I sat down on the edge of a couch near the back wall, hands folded over my knees, knuckles tight. I must have looked like one of the event staff taking a break. No one bothered me. I wasn't even interesting enough to misidentify anymore. The DJ called for the first dance. People clapped. I stayed seated. Then I saw her approaching. Lorna, my mother, with a glass of champagne in one hand and that familiar, "let's not do this here" look on her face. She sat beside me without a word at first, didn't make eye contact, just watched the dance floor. After a few beats, she said, "Let's not make today about anything else, okay?" I didn't answer. No speeches, no scenes, no surprises. Just be graceful. We've worked so hard to keep everything in place. I turned to her. "Do you mean don't be me?" She didn't flinch, just pressed her lips together, gave me a light pat on the hand like I was a guest who had asked for too much, and stood up. Her heels clicked away before I could speak again. I sat there for a while longer, letting that comment settle like wet cement in my chest. It wasn't new. It just finally sounded loud enough to hear. The only version of me that had ever been allowed in this family was the version that kept her mouth shut. When I finally stood to stretch my legs, I passed through a few small clusters of conversation. I wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally. It was just impossible to not hear when your name was being spoken with the same tone they use for dogs that don't bark. Brandy, she's sweet, always stays in the background, never makes things difficult. She's like furniture at family events, reliable and doesn't cause a fuss. A younger cousin tugged on my sleeve and asked genuinely, "Why don't you ever give speeches like Aunt Tressa?" I smiled. "Because nobody hands me the mic." They laughed like it was a joke. I didn't. Back near the dessert table, I stared at the room and thought about every time I'd stepped aside, said less, done more. They called it grace. They called it being the reasonable one. But maybe those were just polite ways of saying, the one who folds. I thought about all the times I'd been praised for being calm, manageable, easy. That hadn't been character. That had been silence dressed up as virtue. I wasn't angry, not yet, but something else was rising, a slow, burning kind of clarity. Just then, a man I didn't recognize stepped up beside me, elderly, maybe a family friend. He glanced at the flowers and said, "You must be the florist. These are incredible." I looked right at him. "No, I'm the one who paid for them." He blinked, embarrassed, mumbled something and shuffled off. I stayed there, arms crossed, not ashamed. My voice, even when calm, still had weight, and they'd pretended it didn't for long enough. I left the hall again, walked through the side corridor, past the storage closet I'd found earlier, and pushed through the back doors. The air was cooler now. Dusk settling in. Out in the lot, I pulled out my phone. The banking app opened with a tap. A list of pending payments blinked back at me. Venue balance, catering deposit, the remaining fees for the photographer. My finger hovered over the cancel option. I wasn't doing this to ruin the day. I wasn't doing this to hurt them. I was doing this because I'd spent my whole life being edited out, and I was finally done co-authoring their version of me. "They want me to stay quiet," I whispered to myself. "Let's see what happens when I don't." Silence used to be my shield. Now it was my weapon. I didn't go far after stepping out, just enough to put a layer of glass and distance between me and the clinking toasts. I found a bench near the garden walkway, one of those decorative stone slabs they place more for aesthetics than comfort. I sat there, hands in my lap, shoulders drawn in, not from the chill in the air, but from something older than that. The sun had started its slow retreat, light shifted from golden to gray. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I hadn't raised my voice once, hadn't pulled focus. Yet here I was, invited out of the room, told with a smile to make space for others. The planner who delivered the message couldn't look me in the eye. "Your mom asked if you might step out for a bit," he'd mumbled. "She's worried the room is full." I glanced behind him. Empty seats were visible at 3 tables. He'd added quickly, "It's not you. There's just concerns about some guests' comfort." Concerns? I'd nodded like I understood, but I did understand. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a gentle eviction, dressed up in hospitality. This wasn't the first time I'd been asked to step aside. I just didn't usually get a front-row view of how rehearsed the request sounded. Out in the fading light, I crossed my arms and stared through the reception hall window. I could see Tressa in her white dress, back turned, laughing. My mother at her side, beaming. Someone popped a champagne cork. Everyone clapped. I stayed quiet. Let the cold air settle into my collarbones. Let the anger pool somewhere behind my ribs. I thought of the dozens of times I'd been moved aside. The gala when my name was skipped in the thank you list. The fundraiser where Tressa took the mic after I did all the legwork. The family dinners where my presence went unacknowledged unless they needed a photographer. And always with that same phrase, just don't make it about you. My father once told me, sometimes silence is kindness. Sometimes it's surrender. That sentence had kept me soft when I should have been steel. No more surrender, I whispered into the empty air. With nowhere else to go, I wandered the building. I wasn't ready to drive off, but I wasn't walking back in either. My feet carried me through a side hallway I hadn't noticed before, wood-paneled, lined with framed photographs. They called it the Legacy Wall. At first, I smiled. Old snapshots, beach vacations, a family reunion I remembered well. There were the cousins in matching t-shirts, Tressa at her high school prom, holding roses, and then, centered in a sleek gold frame, the most recent photo, a professional shoot, everyone perfectly coordinated. The caption read, "The Marlowe family, then now." I leaned in. I remembered the shoot. I was there. I stood just to the right of Tressa, hands behind my back, but in the frame, I was missing. They'd cropped me out, not subtly, not to fit the frame. I was simply gone. I stared at the photo until my face got hot, not with rage, but with something quieter, something heavier. They didn't need me to be gone. They just needed me to not exist. I remembered a cousin once asking me why I wasn't in more family pictures. I'd laughed it off. I'm always behind the camera. The truth landed now, hard and unflinching. Because they like it that way. I turned away from the wall, made my way to the parking lot, climbed into my car, and closed the door gently. I didn't cry. That part of me had gone dry hours ago. Instead, I opened my notes app, typed out every vendor I had on file, the venue, the caterer, the photographer, the floral rep. I checked the cancellation policies, highlighted the refundable deadlines, made a list. This wasn't about revenge. This was about drawing a line, not around them, but around me. For once, I wasn't waiting to be let in. I wasn't sitting at the door, hoping for someone to hand me a chair. I was flipping the whole damn table, and I wasn't doing it with fire. I was doing it with facts, with a slow, steady erasure of my contributions. If they didn't want my name on it, fine. They wouldn't get my name on the invoice either. I took a breath. Then I made the first call. "Hi, this is Brandy Ridley. I'm requesting to reverse tomorrow's flower delivery. We'll be using another supplier." The woman on the line confirmed politely, no questions asked. I hung up, didn't smile, didn't smirk, just looked out the windshield as night finished settling in. "I wasn't kicking over the castle," I whispered. "I was just removing the bricks I laid myself." The room had shifted by the time I returned. Dimmer lights, louder music, more empty glasses than full ones. I moved with intention, slow, invisible, same as always. I made my way to the gift table, not to linger, just to add a small card I'd written out quietly in the car earlier. It was meant for the gift I'd placed earlier that morning. A box wrapped in ivory paper, tied with eucalyptus green ribbon. Inside, a pair of custom-engraved champagne flutes I'd ordered from a small shop in Vermont. They were etched with the couple's initials and wedding date. I chose them because they felt timeless, not trendy, not something that screams, "We registered at a big box store." But when I reached the table, my eyes found the gift. And the tag. A new one. From Aunt Mavis. My mouth stayed shut. I lifted the tag to check the handwriting. It wasn't mine. Mavis stood nearby, sipping rosé, watching me like she was waiting for gratitude. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "You looked so overwhelmed earlier, I thought I'd help make sure it didn't get lost." I didn't reply. That's the thing with people like her. They always dress theft in concern. They assume you're too tired to fight and too polite to call it out. I walked away, quietly, past the DJ booth, past the cake, past the guests who didn't notice I was there to begin with. I didn't say goodbye, didn't make eye contact, just kept moving toward the exit like someone who forgot her phone in the car. Except I wasn't coming back. Once outside, I crossed the gravel slowly and reached my car. It was cold inside, but the quiet was immediate. I didn't turn on the heat. I sat with my phone in hand, already open to the banking app. The numbers were lined up. Remaining balance for the venue, final payment for catering, the floral invoice. I didn't hesitate. I clicked through each transaction. Cancellation, confirmation, refund policy noted. I wasn't angry, just clear. Inside the car, I called the venue first. Hi, this is Brandy Ridley. I'm terminating my financial responsibility for the services scheduled under my account for tomorrow. The woman on the line was caught off guard but professional. Will that be handled by the bride's side then? Yes, please redirect payment requests. Next, I emailed the caterer, then the florist, the photographer, each message carefully worded, calm, legal, no emotion, just action. Every time I hit send, I felt the same thing. Not lighter, not freer, just real. They'd built an entire day on my back and signed someone else's name to it. Now they'd find out what it cost to remove me. You don't get to spend my money and then spend my dignity too, I said to no one. I reached for the AR handkerchief again, folded it slowly, deliberately, laid it gently on the passenger seat like a folded flag. I could hear my father's voice in my head. Some people only learn value after absence. That line used to sting. Tonight, it settled in like fact. I sat there for a minute more, watching the windows of the reception hall through the windshield. The energy inside had shifted. A man in a vest and headset stepped outside, looking irritated, flipping through a clipboard. Another followed, phone pressed to his ear. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to look. Still, I did. Tressa. Did you cancel the florist? Then another. Lorna. We need to talk, right now. I didn't answer either. I pressed the side button and silenced the screen. Started the engine. Pulled the seatbelt across my chest. Exhaled. They weren't going to fall apart because I left, but they were about to see what it looked like when the invisible thread pulled everything apart. Dinner was being served when I slipped back inside. The mood had shifted. Voices were louder, but less joyful. The hum of coordination that had carried the day so far had started to fray. I found my seat, technically the head table. It looked the same as before, except now there was a plate in front of me. Shrimp. 5 of them, curled neatly over a bed of couscous and dill. I blinked at it. I'd submitted my dietary restrictions a month ago. Shellfish allergy, clearly marked. It wasn't a preference. It was a health risk. I glanced to my left. Grilled chicken. To my right. Steak. Mine was the only seafood plate. I flagged down a server, politely. Excuse me, I think there's been a mistake. She checked her list, then bent down slightly and whispered, I was told to make it uniform for photos. That was the answer. I thanked her, got up, left the plate untouched. I wasn't just invisible, I was an inconvenience. On my way out of the room, I passed a table place card stand I hadn't noticed earlier, maybe because I wasn't looking for it. I'd assumed they didn't assign me a place, that I'd been forgotten. But there it was. Brandy. Misspelled. The Y missing. A version of me they hadn't bothered to double-check. A version of me that didn't really exist. I stood there a moment longer, looking at the crooked card, then I walked on. Near the vendor hallway, the real tension was building. The florist stood just outside the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped. The photographer paced like he was waiting for instructions that weren't coming. A man in a vest walked briskly toward the back with what looked like a refund form. Tressa's maid of honor, whose name I never caught, was red in the face and speaking too fast to a planner holding a headset. Lorna pulled Tressa aside. I watched her lips move fast and sharp. Tressa's eyes darted toward the entrance. A perfect day, I thought, collapsing under the weight of the truth. Not because I screamed, but because I stepped away. I made my way toward the side garden entrance, not rushing, just drifting. That's where she found me. Tressa stormed up, veil slightly askew, makeup still intact but barely. Her voice was low but shaking. "Did you cancel the vendors?" I didn't flinch. "I withdrew from what didn't include me." She blinked. "You think this is noble? You're ruining everything." Guests had started to notice. We weren't shouting, but the tension pulled eyes toward us like a spotlight. "This is exactly why we kept you at arm's length," she hissed. "Always playing the victim, always looking for sympathy." A voice behind her said, "I thought she paid for the flowers." Tressa stiffened. A woman in a green shawl lowered her glass and stared between us. I didn't say another word. Let the room connect the dots themselves. A vendor approached, clipboard in hand. "Hi, I'm looking for the original signer of the floral contract, Brandy Ridley?" Several people turned at once. I raised a hand. "That's me." He nodded. "Just needed confirmation. We're coordinating redelivery." Whispers began. Lorna started to step forward, but then stopped. It was like trying to stuff a sheet back into a fitted corner. The illusion didn't hold. I stepped back, out of their line of vision, just as another ripple went through the guests. An older aunt I barely knew touched my elbow gently. "I had no idea," she said. "You should have said something." I looked at her. If I had to say it to be seen, was I ever really there to begin with? She didn't answer. No one did. Tressa looked around the room, and for the first time, it looked like she wasn't sure how to finish the act. It wasn't a takedown. It was a quiet undoing. The lights dimmed just a little before the DJ's voice rolled through the hall, announcing the start of the tribute segment. The crowd clapped politely. Some still hadn't realized things were unraveling. Most were just trying to keep their wine glasses full and their smiles plastered on. I had moved to the side of the stage, near the curtained entrance by the vendor hallway. That's when Sydney walked in. Plain jacket, folder under his arm. He looked like someone who didn't belong, until you saw how steady his steps were. I gave him a small nod. That was all he needed. It wasn't vengeance, I told myself. It was clarity. They built a perfect story. I just brought the editor. As people shuffled into seats for the final round of speeches, Sydney walked straight toward the mic. He smiled once, not too long, then spoke. "I'd like to share a quick story about the bride." Lorna blinked. Tressa shifted in her chair. Guests leaned in, waiting for a sweet, charming anecdote. "It was a few years ago," Sydney continued. "We worked together on a fundraiser for a small nonprofit in town. I remember the excitement, the early ideas, the planning, and I remember watching someone else take the credit." He opened the folder and pulled out a set of papers. "This," he said, holding up a design layout, "is the original blueprint for that gala, created by Brandy Ridley. That's her handwriting." Gasps weren't dramatic, they were quiet, confused, calculating. Then the projector behind him lit up. He flipped to a scanned page, my initials, clear, handwritten at the bottom corner. Then another slide, Tressa's name, written in different ink over the same area. "This wasn't a mistake," Sydney said, still calm. "It was a pattern. Some stories are built on omission. This one was built on theft." Tressa was up in seconds. "You don't belong here," she snapped. "This is my wedding." Sydney turned toward her slowly. "Then sue me." It wasn't a dare. It was a deadpan. Now the room paused. You could feel the tables breathe out all at once. Tressa looked at Lorna, who stood still. Her arms were crossed, but not defensive, just frozen. Several guests started shifting in their seats. Two stood and quietly exited the side door. As Sydney stepped down from the stage, I walked up. Not to argue, not to explain, I just took the mic and said, "I gave her the idea. She gave herself the credit. It's not about one gala. It's about all the little things, ideas, energy, hours, credited to someone who showed up later and louder." I handed the papers to the venue coordinator. Didn't look at Tressa. My name would never get applause, but at least now it was in the room. As I stepped down, I heard murmurs behind me. A cousin said to another, "She's the one who organized Mom's fundraiser 2 years ago, right?" An older neighbor leaned toward Lorna and said, You might have built the wrong favorite." And then a child, someone's niece, I think, pointed to me and said out loud, "She's the brave sister." It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. But the air changed. I walked toward the exit, slowly, steadily. That's when I heard the footsteps. A little girl, maybe 7, running to catch up. She held something in both hands. The handkerchief. "You dropped this," she said, breathless. I looked down. The AR embroidery still intact, just slightly creased from being stepped on. I crouched to her level, met her eyes, and smiled. "Keep it. It belonged to someone who wanted to be seen." She blinked, confused. "But I already saw you." "Exactly," I said. I stood, slipped my coat over one arm, and walked out into the night. Morning didn't arrive with fanfare, it just slipped in through the blinds, quiet and unbothered by everything the night before had shaken loose. I sat in my kitchen, small mug in hand, watching the light creep across the table. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't scroll, just let the silence sit with me, finally, not as a punishment, but as peace. My phone buzzed once, then again, dozens of messages, missed calls, voicemails, from vendors, distant relatives, even Tressa. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. Peace doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it just walks in and sits with you. Later that morning, I took a slow walk into town. The cafe my dad used to love was still there, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. Nothing fancy, just a place with strong coffee and staff who remembered your name without needing a screen to check. Mrs. Evelyn was behind the counter, same as always. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You made headlines, you know," she said, sliding over a cup before I even ordered. "Half the town's talking." She reached under the counter and placed an envelope in front of me. "Someone left this for you. Said you'd know what it meant." Inside was a Polaroid. Me, mid-laugh, adjusting centerpieces 2 days before the wedding. Someone must have snapped it without me knowing. On the back, in familiar handwriting. The one who made it all beautiful, even when they wouldn't let her be seen. I stared at the photo for a while. Didn't cry, didn't smile either. I just folded it neatly and tucked it into my coat pocket. That afternoon, when I got home, I sat on the couch for a moment, let everything catch up. Then I opened one voicemail. Tressa's voice came through, quiet, less polished than usual. "I can't undo what I did," she said. "But I saw it. All of it. I just didn't want to admit it." She didn't ask me to call her. Just left space. "You don't have to respond. But if you do, I'll listen. For real this time." I didn't delete it. Didn't reply either. Not yet. Around sunset, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Lorna. She was holding a box wrapped in faded pink tissue paper, corners bent from years in a closet. "These are yours," she said. "Your drawings. I kept them, just not out where people saw." I didn't say anything. She handed me the box and stood there, unsure of herself for the first time in years. "I was wrong," she said finally. "To think quiet meant lesser." I placed the box on the shelf without opening it, looked her in the eye and said, "Thanks for stopping by." Some mothers raise their daughters to be flowers. Some raise them to be fences. I chose to bloom anyway. That weekend, I went to the community center like I always did. There was a girl there, maybe 15, struggling to rehearse a speech for her class presentation. Her voice shook. Her hands wouldn't stay still. I watched her try again. And fail again. Then crumble. Without a word, I walked over, handed her something folded in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly. The AR handkerchief. "Someone once told me silence was strength," I said. "But today, I think your voice is stronger." She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked back up to the front of the room, her voice trembling but present. That night, I sat by the window in my apartment. The city lights blinked like signals I didn't need to respond to. They may never print my name, but they'll remember the silence that changed everything. I uploaded one photo to my social media. A picture of the canceled flower tag, the one with my name clearly printed, taped over the new label someone had tried to put on top. Caption: I was here. I mattered. I put the phone down, walked to the window, let the cool air kiss my skin, and I breathed. Sometimes the loudest redemption is the one you don't demand.